The designer silk felt less like a dress and more like a straitjacket. Beatrice Hayes stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, the entire city of San Francisco sprawling below her, shrouded in its signature gray fog. It was a beautiful prison. Behind her, her father's voice was a low, satisfied hum as he finalized the details of her sale over the phone. She turned, the heavy satin of the wedding dress rustling in protest. "I won't do it." Her father, a man carved from ambition and ice, lowered his phone just enough to level a cold gaze at her. "This is not a discussion. It's my life," she shot back, her voice trembling with a fury she had swallowed for years. "This isn't a marriage. It's a business transaction, and I refuse to be the closing price." He actually smiled, a thin, cruel slash across his face. "Your childish notions of independence are irrelevant, Beatrice. This is for the family. For our future." He raised his phone back to his ear, dismissing her as easily as he would an annoying fly. Something inside her snapped. The years of quiet compliance, of biting her tongue and editing her dreams, shattered in an instant. Her eyes darted around the opulent hotel suite and landed on a heavy, silver letter opener on the writing desk. Her movements were sharp, precise. She snatched it up, the cold metal a shock against her warm palm. Before her father could register what was happening, she grabbed the edge of her gossamer wedding veil. With a single, violent motion, she ripped the letter opener down through the delicate fabric. The sound of tearing silk was louder than a scream in the silent room. She let the two ruined halves of the veil fall to the plush carpet like a surrendered flag. Her father's face was a mask of disbelief, then rage. "What have you done?" Just then, a polite knock sounded at the door. The groom's family. The distraction was all she needed. While her father composed himself to greet his new business partners, Beatrice slipped out of the suite's service entrance. The hallway was a blur. She kicked off the impossible heels and ran, her bare feet silent on the carpet. She flew down a staircase, burst through a heavy door, and was suddenly outside, the cold, misty rain a shock against her skin. The city streets were a labyrinth of wet pavement and glowing headlights. Panic clawed at her throat as she saw two of her family's security guards exiting the hotel's main entrance, their eyes already scanning the street. She ducked into an alley, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was trapped. Then she saw it. Idling at the curb just beyond the alley's mouth was a sleek, black SUV, its windows so dark they looked like polished stone. It was an island of stillness in the city's chaos. It was insane. It was suicide. It was her only chance. Without another thought, Beatrice launched herself from the shadows. She ran across the wet pavement, yanked open the heavy back door of the SUV, and threw herself inside. She landed in a heap on the cool leather seats, the scent of expensive cologne and something clean, like steel, filling her lungs. She slammed the door shut, turned her wild eyes to the silhouette in the driver's seat, and gasped out the only word she could find. "Drive. Please, just drive." The man behind the wheel didn't flinch. He didn't startle, didn't turn around, didn't even seem to breathe. For a terrifying second, Beatrice thought she had made a fatal mistake. But then, his eyes met hers in the rearview mirror. They weren't angry or surprised. They were calm, assessing, and held a depth that made the breath catch in her throat. Without a word, the powerful engine hummed to life and the SUV pulled away from the curb with impossible smoothness. It slid into the flow of traffic like a shark joining a school of fish. Beatrice scrambled to sit up properly, her torn and dirted wedding dress feeling absurd on the pristine leather seat. The interior of the car was a silent, self-contained world. It smelled of rich leather and a faint, clean scent of cologne that was nothing like her father's cloying fragrances. She watched in the back window as the two security guards from the hotel became small, frantic figures, their search already useless. Her driver navigated the rain-slicked, foggy streets of San Francisco with an unhurried confidence that was more effective than reckless speed. He took a series of deliberate, untraceable turns, and within minutes, any sign of pursuit had vanished into the gray mist. Her heart finally began to slow from its frantic hammering. The adrenaline started to fade, replaced by a cold wave of awareness. She was in a stranger's car. A very calm, very controlled stranger who hadn't asked a single question. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. The man's eyes flickered to the rearview mirror again, a brief, unreadable glance. He ignored her question entirely. Instead, his voice, a low and steady baritone, filled the quiet car for the first time. "Freedom seems important to you," he said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. He paused, letting the words hang in the air between them. "What is it worth?" The question stunned her into silence. It wasn't what she expected. It wasn't, "Are you okay?" or, "What's going on?" It was a transaction. A negotiation. She had no answer for him. She had never thought about freedom in terms of cost, only in terms of its absence. He didn't press for a reply. He drove them out of the dense downtown core, climbing the steep hills until the city's lights began to glitter below them like a fallen constellation. They pulled into the driveway of a starkly modern house perched on a cliffside, a fortress of glass and dark steel that seemed to disappear into the fog. The view was breathtaking and terrifying, a straight, clear shot of the Golden Gate Bridge, its iconic red towers spearing the thick, swirling mist. He killed the engine, and the silence that fell was absolute. "You can stay the night," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He finally turned his head to look at her, his features sharp and defined in the dim light. He was older than her, with lines of experience etched around his eyes. He wasn't saving her. He was acquiring her. Beatrice stared from his unyielding face to the house that looked more like a beautiful prison than a sanctuary. She had run from her father's gilded cage, tearing her veil and her old life to shreds, only to land in another. This one was just colder, quieter, and infinitely more dangerous. Beatrice woke to a world of gray. The morning light that filtered through the vast, floor-to-ceiling window was soft and muted, diffused by the thick blanket of fog that had swallowed the San Francisco Bay. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The bed was enormous, the sheets impossibly smooth against her skin, and the silence was so complete it felt heavy. Then the memory of the torn veil, the desperate run, and the black SUV crashed back into her. She was in his house. The silent driver's house. She sat up, pulling the sheet around her. The ruined wedding dress was gone. In its place, draped over a minimalist black chair, was a set of simple gray sweats and a soft t-shirt. There was no note. There didn't need to be. The message was clear: your past has been removed, and I will provide your future. A shiver of defiance ran through her. She was a prisoner, but she would not be a docile one. She dressed quickly and left the sterile bedroom, her bare feet cold against the polished concrete floor. The house was an architectural marvel of glass and steel, a cage with the most beautiful view in the world. Every room seemed to flow into the next, all of it oriented toward the giant windows that stared out at the ghostly silhouette of the Golden Gate Bridge. It was magnificent and deeply lonely. The furniture was expensive and impersonal, as if chosen from a catalog for a man who cared about style but not comfort. She found her way to a study. Like the rest of the house, it was severe and orderly. A single mahogany desk stood facing the window, its surface completely bare except for one object: a fountain pen. It was heavy and black, with a silver nib that caught the weak morning light. She picked it up, feeling its surprising weight in her palm. It felt like a weapon. A tool for signing contracts and rewriting lives. It felt like him. He was a ghost in his own home. She never saw him, but she felt his presence everywhere. A tray of food would appear on the kitchen island, fresh fruit, coffee, toast, while she was in another room. He was watching her, she knew it. He was giving her space, letting the silence and her total dependence on him sink in. He was letting her see the bars of her new cage. By afternoon, she couldn't stand it anymore. The quiet was a form of torture. She found him on a balcony that hung suspended over the cliffside, staring into the swirling fog. He wore a simple black sweater and jeans, looking less like a kidnapper and more like a man contemplating his kingdom. "I want to leave," she said, her voice sharp and loud in the damp air. He didn't turn around immediately. He took a slow breath, as if savoring the cold air, before his gaze finally fell on her. His eyes were the color of storm clouds. "Where would you go?" "That's none of your business. Let me go." He took a step toward her, closing the distance between them until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He wasn't menacing, but his sheer presence was overwhelming. He gestured with his chin toward the invisible city hidden by the fog. "Out there," he said, his voice a low, chillingly reasonable rumble. "Your family is turning this city upside down looking for you. To them, you are a broken contract. You are their property." He paused, letting the ugly truth of his words land. Then his eyes met hers, and the trap snapped shut. "In here," he finished softly. "You are my guest." Beatrice felt the blood drain from her face. Guest. The word was a lie, a silken cover for something much uglier. He had laid out her choices with brutal clarity. She could belong to her father, or she could belong to him. The line between guest and possession had never felt so thin. He finally broke the suffocating silence of the balcony, and gestured back toward the house. "We should talk." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a summons. Beatrice followed him, her bare feet making no sound on the cold floor. He led her to the study, the room with the single, heavy fountain pen on the desk. He didn't sit behind it like a king on a throne. Instead, he leaned against the edge, crossing his arms and creating an illusion of casualness that did nothing to soften his intensity. "Beatrice Hayes," he began, his voice a low, steady current. 26. Graduated top of your class in journalism. Your last official piece was an investigative report on municipal construction contracts. You got too close to some very powerful people. Your father pulled some strings, and your career stalled. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart. She felt her blood run cold. He didn't just know her name, he knew her. He knew the part of her she was most proud of, the part her family had tried so hard to erase. "How do you know that?" she whispered, her defiance momentarily forgotten, replaced by a raw, chilling vulnerability. "It's my business to know things," he said simply. "Your father's world of polite handshakes and my world, they aren't so different, Beatrice. They just use different tools." He let that sink in before he pushed off the desk and began to pace slowly before the window, a predator in his cage. "Your family will never stop looking for you. A stunt like the one you pulled is an embarrassment, a broken deal. They will find you, and they will drag you back." He stopped and turned to face her, his eyes pinning her in place. "Or I can make them stop. Permanently. I can give you a new life, a real one. The independence you were running toward. I can give you your freedom." There it was. The word that had driven her out into the rain. Freedom. He said it so easily, as if it were a simple commodity he could purchase for her. Beatrice's heart hammered in her chest, a frantic bird beating against her ribs. She knew there was a catch. There was always a catch. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "I need your skills," he said, his tone shifting from philosophical to pure business. "The skills your father tried to bury. I have a rival. He doesn't operate in the shadows like I do. He shakes hands with senators. He sits on charity boards. He uses laws and political influence as his weapons, and against that, my usual methods are clumsy." He walked to the desk and picked up the heavy fountain pen, turning it over in his fingers. "I can't fight him in the dark, so I need to drag him into the light. I need someone to investigate him, to follow the money, to find the cracks in his perfect public facade. I need a journalist to find a weakness I can exploit." The air left Beatrice's lungs in a rush. It was all there, laid out with brutal simplicity. Her freedom was the bait. His war was the price. To escape her family, she would have to indebt herself to a man who was infinitely more dangerous. She would have to use the very ambition they tried to crush, but in service of a monster. A strange, terrifying thrill shot through her, warring with her fear. Her father wanted her to be a silent doll. This man, this stranger, wanted her to be a weapon. For the first time since she'd ripped that veil, she felt seen. And it terrified her more than anything. Beatrice spent the next day in a silent battle with herself. The fog outside the windows was a perfect reflection of her mind, a swirling gray confusion with no clear path forward. She paced the length of the glass wall, from the sterile kitchen to the cold study and back again, the Golden Gate Bridge appearing and disappearing in the mist like a half-forgotten promise. His offer echoed in her head. A cage for a cage. A master for a master. But it wasn't that simple, was it? Her father wanted to lock her away, to make her small and silent. This man, this Daniel Irving, she'd learned his name from a monogrammed towel in the bathroom, wanted to unleash her. He didn't want her silence. He wanted her voice, her mind, her teeth. The thought was both terrifying and intoxicating. It was the most respect anyone had shown her in years. By evening, the fog had thickened into a heavy blanket, erasing the world outside. Beatrice's resolve had hardened into something sharp and clear. She was done being a piece in someone else's game. If she was going to step into this dangerous world, she would do it as a player, not a pawn. She found him in the study, staring at the empty desk as if willing a strategy to appear on its polished surface. He looked up as she entered, his storm-gray eyes immediately finding hers. The air crackled with unspoken tension. This was it. "I've considered your proposal," she said, her voice steady, betraying none of the fear coiling in her stomach. He inclined his head slightly, waiting. "I accept," she said, and saw a flicker of something, satisfaction perhaps, in his eyes. She held up a hand before he could speak. "But not on your terms." "On mine." His eyebrows lifted in genuine surprise. This, he had not expected. Beatrice took a step forward, closing the distance between them, claiming her space in the room. "I will not be your employee. I won't be your hired help or your secret weapon. I will be your ally. An equal partner in this." She saw his expression shift from surprise to intense focus. He was listening. Really listening. "That means I get full access," she pressed on, her confidence growing with every word. "All your files, all your intelligence. No secrets. No redacted reports. I need the whole truth to find the real story." She took a breath, steeling herself for her final, non-negotiable demand. "And when I find it, I will publish it. I'm a journalist, not your personal saboteur. Your rival goes down, but he goes down because the truth takes him down. And my name will be on the article." Silence. The only sound was the faint hum of the house's ventilation. Daniel stared at her, his face unreadable. Beatrice held his gaze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had just laid down the law to a man who could likely make her disappear with a single phone call. She had demanded control. Then, the impossible happened. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. It transformed his harsh features, reaching his eyes and filling them with a dangerous light she hadn't seen before. It wasn't amusement. It was respect. "An ally," he repeated softly, as if tasting the word. He nodded to himself. "Yes. That's much better." He walked to the desk, his movements fluid and deliberate. He picked up the heavy fountain pen and held it out to her. It wasn't a gift. It was a contract. A coronation. Beatrice reached out, her fingers brushing against his as she took it. A jolt, hot and sharp, shot up her arm. The pen felt heavy in her hand, a solid weight of purpose. "Then let's get to work, Beatrice Hayes," Daniel said, his smile fading back into that look of intense focus, but this time, it was aimed not at her, but with her. A shared gaze of mutual, dangerous understanding passed between them, sealing the deal more completely than any signature ever could. The next morning, the heavy fountain pen sat beside a brand-new laptop on the mahogany desk. It was matte black, sleek, and looked like it could survive a war. Beatrice ran her fingers over the smooth metal casing before opening it. The screen glowed to life, displaying a single, secure login prompt. Daniel walked into the study, placing a thick manila folder on the desk beside the computer. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. Marcus Thorne, he said, his voice a low, hard rumble. To the city, he's a real estate mogul and a philanthropist. He funds hospitals, sits on the board of the opera. To me, he's a snake poisoning my city from the inside out. Beatrice looked from Daniel's cold, controlled fury to the folder. His hatred for this man was a living thing in the room. What does he do? Everything I do, Daniel answered without hesitation. But he does it behind a shield of political favors and public goodwill. He launders money through charity auctions and hides his assets in a web of shell corporations so tangled no one has ever been able to unravel it. He tapped the folder. That's your starting point. A list of his legitimate businesses and known associates. I suspect the key is in one of his smaller construction subsidiaries. Find the loose thread, Beatrice. Pull it, and the whole thing will come undone. He left her then, and the silence he left behind was different. It wasn't the heavy, oppressive silence of a prison. It was the quiet of a library, a workspace, a headquarters. For the first time in years, Beatrice felt the familiar, addictive hum of the hunt. The world outside the glass walls of the house ceased to exist. The fog, the bay, the distant bridge, it all faded into a blur. Her entire universe shrank to the glowing screen in front of her. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, the quiet clicks echoing in the study. This was her element. This was who she was. She dove into Marcus Thorne's world, a pristine, manicured landscape of press releases and five-star reviews. But Beatrice knew that perfection was always a lie. She cross-referenced public records, dug through digital archives, and followed faint, forgotten money trails. Every dead end was a challenge, not a defeat. Every encrypted file was a locked door she was born to pick. Hours melted into a seamless flow of time. She forgot to eat. She barely slept. Daniel would appear silently at her side, placing a cup of coffee or a plate of food on the desk without a word. She would murmur a thank you without ever taking her eyes off the screen. Once she felt his presence linger behind her. She knew he was looking at her monitor, at the chaotic but brilliant map of names, companies, and arrows she was building. He said nothing, but when he left, she felt a strange sense of approval radiating in the air. This was more than a job. It was a resurrection. Every connection she made, every hidden account she flagged, was a piece of herself she was reclaiming. Her father had tried to smother this fire inside her, to replace her ambition with a wedding veil. But Daniel had thrown gasoline on the embers. Here, in this gilded cage, armed with a laptop and a monster's trust, Beatrice Hayes was finally in control. Late on the third night, she found it. A discrepancy. A tiny, almost insignificant payment from one of Thorne's construction companies to a holding company with a meaningless name. It was a needle in a digital haystack. But the holding company's registered address wasn't a sleek downtown office. It was a waterfront warehouse in a derelict part of the city. An industrial property. Not a place for paperwork. A place for things. Or people. Her heart began to hammer in her chest, a primal thrum of victory and fear. She had the thread. It was thin and frayed, but she had it. Now, she just had to pull. It's not enough, Beatrice announced, pushing away from the desk. The sun was a weak suggestion behind the morning fog, and she hadn't slept. Her eyes burned, but her mind was on fire. Daniel turned from the window where he'd been watching the city wake up. You found a shell corporation's address. I found a lie. She corrected him, her voice sharp with adrenaline. Thorne's accountants are meticulous. They don't make mistakes. That warehouse isn't a clerical error, it's a hub. A digital trail only goes so far. I need to see it. I need eyes on it. No, Daniel said flatly. The word was a stone wall. I'll send my men. Your men are soldiers. They'll see a building, she argued, stepping toward him. I'm a journalist. I'll see the story. The state of the locks, the type of security cameras, the tire tracks in the mud. Details your men won't even know to look for. Let me do my job. He studied her, his face a mask of cold calculation. She saw the refusal in his eyes and pushed one last time. You wanted an ally, Daniel. So treat me like one. Don't bench me. A long, tense silence stretched between them. Finally, he gave a short, sharp nod. 1 hour. You'll be shadowed. You'll carry this. He pressed the small, burner phone into her hand. Anything goes wrong, you press 1. That's it. Understood? Understood, she said, her heart giving a triumphant leap. The waterfront was even grimmer than she'd imagined. The air was thick with the smell of salt and decay, and the fog coiled around the rusted skeletons of abandoned warehouses. It was perfect. She felt the old, familiar thrill of being in the field, of chasing a truth that didn't want to be found. She stayed in the shadows, her small camera feeling like a natural extension of her hand. Click. A wide shot of the building. Click. A close-up of the new, high-tech security camera, completely out of place on the decaying structure. She saw a dark security van parked in a side alley. It was nondescript, but something about it felt wrong. She needed the license plate. Getting bolder, she crept closer, using a stack of rotting pallets for cover. She lifted her camera, zooming in on the plate. Just as the image focused, the warehouse door creaked open. 2 men in dark, well-tailored suits stepped out. They weren't dock workers. Their eyes, hard and flat, scanned the area with professional paranoia. And then they stopped. On her. For a frozen second, nobody moved. The world went silent except for the blood roaring in Beatrice's ears. Then one of the men pointed, and she bolted. She ran, her lungs burning with the cold, damp air. She dodged shipping containers and leaped over debris, the men's heavy footsteps pounding the pavement behind her. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at her throat. She was a rider, not a runner. She fumbled in her pocket for the phone, her thumb mashing the number 1 just as she skidded into a dead-end alley. Trapped. The 2 men slowed, walking toward her with predatory confidence. Just as they closed in, the squeal of tires cut through the air. A black sedan appeared at the mouth of the alley, blocking their path. 2 of Daniel's men got out. They were silent, efficient, and moved with a brutal grace that was terrifying to watch. It was over in seconds. Beatrice didn't see exactly what happened, she only saw her pursuers suddenly on the ground, neutralized. One of Daniel's men simply opened the back door of the sedan for her. The ride back to the safe house was a silent, vibrating eternity. When she walked through the door, Daniel was waiting for her in the middle of the room. The calm, controlled man was gone. In his place was a creature of coiled fury. She braced herself for the explosion, for him to yell at her for her recklessness. But his anger wasn't aimed at her. He started pacing, his energy so volatile it felt like it might crack the room's glass walls. "They saw you," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He stopped and pinned her with a look of pure ice. "They put their eyes on you. On what is mine." The possessiveness in his voice should have terrified her. It should have felt like her father's cage, just with deadlier bars. But it didn't. This wasn't about ownership. It was about the violation. His rage wasn't because a plan went wrong. It was because Thorne had dared to touch her. Before she could process it, he crossed the room in 2 long strides and grabbed her shoulders, his grip firm but not painful. His furious eyes scanned her face, her arms, searching for any sign of injury. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, the question raw, stripped of all his usual control. In that moment, the wall between them didn't just crack, it disintegrated. The Mafia boss, the silent driver, the calculating strategist, all of it fell away, and she saw the man underneath, blazing with a protective fire that was aimed entirely at her. And it was the most terrifying, compelling thing she had ever seen. The shared danger had been a spark, and his rage was the accelerant. They were closer now, bonded by a threat and an emotion neither of them could name. The protective rage that had blazed out of Daniel slowly cooled, but it left the air in the safe house charged and thick. The space between them had changed. It was no longer just the protector and the protected. Beatrice felt the invisible line they had drawn between them had been burned away by the events at the warehouse. She returned to the study not because he told her to, but because she had a new, more urgent need for answers. Who were those men? Why was that warehouse so important? She pushed aside the fear and the lingering shock, channeling it all into a cold, sharp focus. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, her mind racing. The warehouse was owned by a shell company, which was owned by another and another. It was a classic Russian doll setup, designed to hide the final owner in a maze of legal paperwork. But Beatrice was relentless. She didn't sleep. She didn't eat the food Daniel left for her. She was a hunter on a scent, and she would not stop until she had her prey. For 2 days she lived inside the digital labyrinth of Marcus Thorne's empire. Then she broke through. She found a list of directors for a key holding company, the one that seemed to be the linchpin for all the others. The names were meaningless, a collection of lawyers and accountants paid to be anonymous. She scanned the list, her eyes gritty with exhaustion. Then she stopped. Her entire body went cold. The name wasn't exact. It was an initial and a surname. A. Hayes. But she knew that signature. She had seen it on her trust fund documents, on school permission slips, on every check that had ever paid for her gilded cage. Her father. The world tilted on its axis. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps as the pieces clicked into place with sickening speed. The arranged marriage. Her father's sudden insistence on a powerful new family alliance. His cold dismissal of her life's ambitions. It wasn't about tradition. It was never about tradition. It was a deal. An alliance. A merger between her family and Daniel's most hated rival. She wasn't a bride. She was a bargaining chip. A wave of nausea washed over her. She felt bile rise in her throat. She had been running from a life she didn't want, but the reality was so much worse. She had been running from being sold to the enemy. Rage, pure and undiluted, flooded her veins, burning away the shock. She shot up from the chair, the laptop clutched in her hand like a weapon. She stormed through the house and found Daniel on the balcony, staring into the night. "You knew," she accused, her voice shaking with a fury so profound it felt like it would tear her apart. "You knew my father was involved with him." Daniel turned slowly, his face calm, but his eyes were watchful. He saw the truth blazing in her expression. She thrust the laptop at him, her finger jabbing at the screen, at her father's name. "Did you know? Is this why you picked me up? Was this whole thing just a game to use me against my own family?" He looked from the screen back to her face, his expression unreadable. He didn't deny it. "I suspected," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble that cut through her chaotic anger. "I knew your father was corrupt, and I knew he was looking for a powerful new partner. The timing of your engagement was too convenient. But I had no proof. Nothing concrete to link him directly to Thorne." He took a step closer, his eyes holding hers. "That's why I needed you, Beatrice. I needed your eyes. I needed someone who wasn't part of my world to see the connections I was too close to find." His words were not an apology, but they were the truth. The devastating, ugly truth. He hadn't lied to her. He had simply let her discover the betrayal for herself. Her fury didn't vanish, but it shifted, its full, crushing weight turning from him to the man who raised her. Her father hadn't just tried to control her. He had tried to hand her over to a monster to seal a business deal. The torn veil, the desperate escape, it hadn't just been a bid for freedom. It had been an escape from being a human sacrifice on the altar of his ambition. The fury didn't break her. It forged her. Beatrice stood on the balcony, the cold night air a balm against her burning skin. The shock had receded, leaving behind a terrifying, crystalline clarity. The betrayal wasn't a wound, it was a key. It unlocked a part of her she never knew existed, a part that was as cold and ruthless as her father. This was no longer Daniel's war that she was assisting. This was her war, and he was now her weapon. She turned from the railing and walked back into the study, her movements deliberate and sure. Daniel was still standing where she had left him, watching her, his expression unreadable. The power in the room had shifted, and he knew it. "Thorn is the target," she said, her voice devoid of any of its earlier tremor. It was flat, hard steel. "But my father is the foundation. We don't just expose Thorn. We burn the entire empire to the ground. His and my father's." Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, studying her. He saw the change. The frightened runaway was gone, replaced by a queen ready to claim her board. "That will be more difficult," he said, not as a warning, but as a statement of fact. "Your father has decades of entrenched power. And I have decades of his secrets," she countered, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. It held no warmth. "He taught me to be observant, to be perfect. He never imagined I was observing him." She walked to the large screen on the wall and plugged in her laptop, her father's name glowing in the center of her complex web. "You have the muscle, the resources. I have the map to his soul. From now on, I run the intelligence. I devise the strategy. You and your men execute. Are we clear?" He didn't answer immediately. He walked to stand beside her, his shoulder almost brushing hers. He looked at the screen, at the intricate lines she had drawn connecting her father to Thorn. Then he looked at her. The respect in his eyes was absolute. "Crystal," he said. The days that followed blurred into a single, continuous night. The study became their war room. Beatrice worked with a feverish intensity that was both brilliant and frightening. She covered the glass walls with notes and timelines, her handwriting a sharp, angry script. She lived on black coffee and the raw, satisfying thrill of vengeance. Daniel was a constant presence at her side. He no longer just brought her food, he sat with her, watching her work, listening as she thought aloud, untangling the webs her father had spent a lifetime weaving. They were a team. A true partnership born from betrayal and forged in a shared desire for destruction. He would lean over her shoulder to point at a name on the screen, his scent, leather and steel, surrounding her. She never flinched. She would hand him a file, their fingers brushing, and neither of them would pull away. Late at night, when exhaustion finally claimed her, she would wake to find a blanket draped over her shoulders, Daniel asleep in the chair across the room, as if standing guard over her dreams. The lines between ally and something more intimate were dissolving with every shared secret, every quiet glance in the glow of the monitors. "He uses a private courier for his most sensitive documents," Beatrice murmured late one night, her eyes tracing a flight path on the screen. "A man named Elias Vance. He's the weak link." Daniel leaned in, his voice a low rumble near her ear. "How do we use him?" Beatrice turned her head, her face only inches from his. The air grew thick, charged with more than just strategy. "We don't," she said softly, her eyes holding his. "We become him." A slow, predatory smile touched her lips. "We're going to intercept the package and replace it with one of our own." She was no longer just finding the story. She was writing it. And she was going to make sure her father read every last, devastating word. The click of the keyboard was the only sound in the study for 48 straight hours. Beatrice was deep inside Marcus Thorne's financial history, a place of shadows and lies, and she was perfectly at home. She had followed a series of untraceable payments to an offshore account, and from there to a private trust. It was a dead end, sealed with the best legal protection money could buy. But Beatrice didn't need to break down the door. She just needed to find who held the key. After hours of cross-referencing property deeds and medical insurance policies linked to Thorne's inner circle, she found it. A woman. A former assistant who had quietly resigned 7 years ago. A woman who now lived in a discreet, comfortable home in a quiet suburb, all paid for by the anonymous trust. A woman with a 6-year-old son. A son with Marcus Thorne's unmistakable eyes, judging by the one photo on her private social media. Beatrice's breath hitched. This was it. The silver bullet. Thorne's entire public image was built on being a family man, a pillar of the community, married for 30 years to a society heiress. An illegitimate child, a secret family funded by laundered money. It wasn't just a scandal. It was an annihilation. Daniel! She called out, her voice rough from disuse. He was in the room in seconds, drawn by the urgent, triumphant note in her voice. She didn't look up from the screen. She just pointed. There. That's how we cripple him. Daniel leaned over her, his presence a warm, solid wall at her back. He read the information on the screen, his expression unreadable. Beatrice's heart hammered with a cold, predatory excitement. We leak it, she said, her voice low and sharp. An anonymous tip to a rival paper. The mother's name, the child's school, the proof of payments. His political allies will abandon him overnight. His wife's family will gut him. He'll be radioactive. It's perfect. She looked up at him, expecting to see the same ruthless satisfaction reflected in his eyes. Instead, his face was hard. A mask of cold stone. No, he said. The word was flat. Absolute. Beatrice stared at him, confused. No? Daniel, this is everything. This will destroy him without you ever having to lift a finger. I said no. He straightened up, turning his back on the screen as if its contents were a poison he refused to touch. I don't understand. She pushed, standing to face him. This is a war. You don't win wars by holding back. This is not how I fight, he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He turned back to her, and his eyes were blazing with an intensity that made her take a step back. Marcus Thorne is the target. The woman who made a mistake 7 years ago is not. Her son is not. He took a step toward her, closing the space between them until she could feel the heat rolling off him. There are rules, Beatrice. Even in this. My fight is with the men who choose to be in this life. I do not touch their families. I do not target civilians. I do not destroy the innocent to get to the guilty. He paused, his gaze boring into hers, forcing her to understand. We are not butchers. We are surgeons. We remove the disease, precisely and with a clear purpose. What you are suggesting is burning down the entire hospital to kill one patient. Beatrice was speechless. The air left her lungs in a silent rush. All this time, she had seen him as a monster, a creature of the dark, a man for whom the ends would always justify the means. She had been so consumed by her own quest for vengeance that she had been willing to become that monster herself. But he wasn't. He was a killer, a criminal, a man who lived by violence and intimidation, but he had a line. A code of honor that was as unyielding as steel. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not a monster, but a man, a dangerous, complicated man who lived by a moral compass she couldn't have imagined existed. He was a man of shadows, but he refused to extinguish an innocent light. The discovery was a shock to her system, more profound than uncovering any of her father's betrayals. The fear she felt for him was still there, but now it was tangled with something else. A deep, unsettling, and powerful respect. And an attraction to the man who was so much more than the monster she had first believed him to be. The moment Daniel refused to use the child, the entire strategy shifted. The air in the study changed. It was no longer about finding a weakness to exploit. It was about building a weapon. Beatrice looked at the complex web of corruption on the walls, not as a journalist trying to uncover a story, but as a general surveying a battlefield. She would not be a butcher. She would be a surgeon, just as he'd said. And her scalpel would be the truth, or something that looked close enough to it. We can't destroy them from the outside, she said 2 days later, breaking a long silence. Daniel was watching her, as he always was now. His gaze was a constant, steady pressure at her back, but it wasn't the gaze of a guard. It was the gaze of a man watching an artist at work. Their walls are too high. So we make them tear each other down from the inside. She turned from the screen, her eyes bright with a cold, brilliant fire. Men like my father and Marcus Thorne don't trust each other. Their alliances are built on greed and fear. We just need to give them a reason to be afraid of each other. Daniel leaned against the desk, crossing his arms. He didn't question her. He just listened. How? We create a story, she said, her voice dropping, filled with the thrill of the idea. A perfectly crafted, completely believable lie. We'll build a dossier. Bank statements showing Thorne is moving money into accounts my father can't touch. Transcripts of conversations, fabricated, of course, where Thorne discusses cutting my father out of the deal once he has what he needs. We'll make it look like Thorne is planning to betray him, to hand him over to the feds to save himself. She began to pace, the plan spilling out of her. It has to be perfect. The details have to be flawless, the language exactly right. It needs to look like a secret file stolen from Thorne's inner circle. Daniel watched her, a slow, dangerous smile touching his lips. He was completely captivated. This was the woman he had seen in the rearview mirror of his SUV, fierce, defiant, and brilliant. He had offered her a cage, and instead, she had taken command of his entire war. "What do you need from me?" he asked, his voice a low rumble of support. "Everything," she answered without hesitation. "I need to know how Thorne moves his most sensitive information. I need details on his private security, his communication protocols. I need to know what kind of lie a man like my father would believe without question." For the next week, she became the queen of their chessboard. Daniel became her primary resource, answering her questions with brutal efficiency, providing her with a level of classified intelligence that made her blood run cold. She orchestrated the entire operation, her mind a whirlwind of strategy and deception. She was no longer a damsel to be protected, she was a threat. Using a secure connection, she reached out to an old contact, a low-level financial blogger she knew was secretly on Thorne's payroll. She didn't give him the dossier. Instead, she fed him a single, unverifiable crumb of information, a rumor about a federal investigation into Thorne's political donors. It was a ghost story, but it was enough to plant a seed of doubt, to make Thorne's world feel a little less stable. It was a warning shot no one but she and Daniel would understand. Finally, the dossier was complete. It was a masterpiece of deceit, a work of art printed on high-grade paper and bound in a simple black folder. It looked official. It felt dangerous. It was the key to everything. Beatrice placed it on the center of the mahogany desk. Daniel walked over, standing beside her. They both looked down at the folder, the physical manifestation of their alliance. It held the power to ruin two of the most powerful men in the city. "The trap is set," she said softly, the words hanging in the silent room. Daniel looked from the folder to her face, his eyes dark with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Now we just need to make sure the right person walks into it." The dossier was gone. Daniel's most trusted man had delivered it, a ghost slipping through the city's nervous system to place the folder on the right desk, into the right hands. The trap was set. All the pieces were in motion, moving toward a single point on a map, a single hour on the clock. A meeting had been arranged. Her father and Marcus Thorne, finalizing their alliance at a desolate vista point overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge. Beatrice was the final term of the contract, the living, breathing proof of their new partnership. The waiting was a special kind of hell. The safe house, once a cage, then a headquarters, now felt like the quiet, humming space before a lightning strike. The air was thick with unspoken possibilities and a metallic taste of danger. Beatrice couldn't stay inside. She walked out onto the balcony, the cold, damp air a shock against her skin. The fog was a living entity tonight, a great, gray beast swallowing the city whole. The iconic red towers of the bridge were gone, erased by the mist. All that was left was the suggestion of a path leading into nothingness. She gripped the cold metal railing, her knuckles white. She was the bait, the prize, and the executioner, all at once. For the first time, a tremor of fear, cold and sharp, cut through the armor of her anger. It wasn't a fear of dying. It was a fear of what would come after. If they succeeded, if she burned her old life to the ground, what would be left in the ashes? A quiet footstep sounded behind her. She didn't need to turn. She knew his presence, felt it like a change in atmospheric pressure. Daniel came to stand beside her, not too close, but near enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cold night. He didn't speak for a long time. They stood together in the silence, two allies on the eve of battle, watching the fog devour the world. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" he finally asked, his voice a low rumble that seemed to be the only solid thing in the swirling mist. Beatrice kept her eyes fixed on the invisible bridge. "I'm ready to end it," she answered honestly. She took a shaky breath, the vulnerability surprising her. "I just don't know what comes after it ends." She felt him turn his head to look at her. His gaze was heavy, intense. "Whatever you want," he said simply. She finally turned to face him, the faint light from the house carving his features from the shadows. "It's not that simple. I've spent my whole life being a piece in someone else's game. My father's. Thorn's." She looked him straight in the eye, the unspoken question hanging between them. "Yours." Daniel's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened. He saw it all, the fear beneath her strength, the girl who had run in the rain still hiding inside the woman who commanded his war. He took a step closer, closing the small, safe distance between them. The air crackled. "No matter what happens tomorrow," he said, his voice low and fiercely sincere, "you will not be a pawn. You have my word." The promise landed in the center of her chest with a physical weight. It was more than a reassurance. It was a vow. He was placing her, her will, her choice, above the entire operation. He was telling her that his victory was secondary to her freedom. No one had ever given her a gift like that. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and sharp, but she refused to let them fall. She just held his gaze, a silent, profound understanding passing between them. He was a man of shadows, a king in a world of violence, but he had just handed her the crown to her own life. He lifted his hand, his fingers hesitating for a fraction of a second before they gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was electric, a spark in the cold, damp air. His thumb grazed her skin, a fleeting moment of contact that felt more intimate than a kiss. Then he let his hand fall away. The storm was coming. The fog swirled around them, hiding the path ahead. But for the first time, Beatrice wasn't afraid of getting lost. She wasn't alone in the dark. The ride was silent, a mirror of that first, panicked night in his SUV. But tonight Beatrice wasn't running from anything. She was driving directly into the heart of the storm. Dressed in a simple, dark cashmere sweater and black trousers Daniel had provided, she felt more powerful than she ever had in designer silk. She stared out the window as the car climbed the winding road, watching the city lights dissolve into the thick, rolling fog. Daniel's promise from the night before was a shield around her heart. "You will not be a pawn." The car slowed, pulling into a deserted vista point. The world outside was a stage set for ghosts. The headlights of two other dark cars cut harsh, white tunnels through the oppressive fog, illuminating two figures standing between them. Her father and Marcus Thorne. The iconic span of the Golden Gate Bridge was completely invisible, erased by the night and the mist. It was a bridge to nowhere. One of Daniel's men opened her door. The cold, damp air immediately clung to her skin, tasting of salt and gasoline. She stepped out, her boots making a soft sound on the wet asphalt. Both men turned their heads at the same time, their conversation ceasing. The silence was absolute, broken only by the low hum of the idling engines. Her father's eyes swept over her, cold and assessing. There was no warmth, no relief, only the grim satisfaction of a man reclaiming a misplaced, valuable asset. His look said, finally, "The merchandise has arrived." He was annoyed by the inconvenience she had caused, nothing more. Then Marcus Thorne's gaze landed on her. It was different, but no less dehumanizing. His eyes were hungry, filled with a collector's avarice. He wasn't looking at a person, he was looking at the final, beautiful piece of a set he was acquiring. He smiled, a thin, proprietary smirk that made her skin crawl. "Beatrice," her father said, his voice sharp, cutting through the thick air. "Enough of this foolishness. Come here." It was an order, the same tone he'd used on her since she was a child. Thorne took a step forward, his expensive shoes gleaming in the headlights. "Let the girl have a moment, Arthur." he said, his voice a smooth, predatory purr. She's had a trying few weeks. We have her now. That's all that matters. We have her now. The words echoed in the hollow space inside Beatrice's chest. They passed her back and forth with their words, sealing her fate as if she were a line item in their contract. But beneath the cold fury, Daniel's promise was a burning ember. She felt a flicker of movement in the deep shadows just beyond the cars, a shape darker than the night. Daniel was here. He was watching. He was waiting for her. Her father gestured impatiently, a flick of his wrist that was meant to command her obedience. The deal is done, Thorn. The girl is yours. He looked at Beatrice, his face a mask of cold finality. It's time to be useful. He took a step toward her, his hand outstretched, ready to take her arm and deliver her like a package. This was the moment. The final transaction. The signing of a contract written in her own blood. She could feel the entire world holding its breath, waiting for her to comply. Just as his fingers were about to close around her arm, she spoke. Her voice wasn't a plea. It was a judgment, clear and sharp, cutting through the thick fog like a shard of glass. The deal is off. Her father froze, his hand hovering in the air between them. Marcus Thorne's smug smile faltered. Both men stared at her, as if she had suddenly grown a second head. What foolishness are you talking about now, Beatrice? Her father snapped, his voice tight with irritation. I'm talking about the dossier, she said, her gaze fixed on Thorne. She saw the flicker of alarm in his eyes, the first crack in his perfect, controlled facade. The one detailing your plan to use my father's political connections before turning him over to the feds. The one outlining how you were moving assets into accounts he couldn't touch. Thorne's face paled, his eyes darting toward her father. Arthur Hayes turned on his new partner, his expression shifting from annoyance to suspicion. What is she talking about, Thorne? Beatrice didn't let either of them speak. She was in control now. This was her stage. He's been playing you from the start, she said to her father, her voice dripping with ice. And you were so blinded by greed you were willing to sell your own daughter to him to make it happen. She let the ugly truth hang in the air between them, a poison they both had to breathe. I am not a contract to be signed, she declared, her eyes locking first with her father's, then with Thorne's, pinning them both with the force of her will. Then, she did something neither of them expected. She turned her head, her gaze piercing the deep shadows beyond the headlights where she knew he was waiting. And I am not a weapon to be used. The words were a declaration of independence aimed at the entire world. A figure detached itself from the darkness. Daniel Irving stepped into the harsh glare of the headlights, his men materializing silently behind him like ghosts summoned from the mist. Her father and Thorne recoiled, their faces masks of pure terror. The power on the vista point had just shifted, violently and completely. Thorne's hand twitched toward his jacket, but he froze as Daniel's men raised their weapons in a single, fluid motion. The air grew still and deadly. This was it. The moment of annihilation. The end of the game. But Daniel didn't look at his rival. He didn't look at her father. He looked only at Beatrice. His face was unreadable, but his eyes held the weight of the promise he had made her. He had the power to destroy both men right here, to end his war in a final, bloody move. He could use her as the ultimate weapon, just as she had challenged. Instead, he honored his word. The choice is yours, he said, his voice a low, steady rumble meant for her ears alone. The world seemed to fall away. The fear, the fog, the two pathetic, powerful men, it all vanished. There was only Daniel's unwavering gaze and the impossible weight of his loyalty. He had given her everything. The power. The vengeance. The final say. He had chosen her will over his own victory. Beatrice felt a profound, shuddering breath leave her body. The cold fury that had driven her for weeks finally settled into something calm and absolute. She looked at her father, a man made small by his own greed. She looked at Thorne, a predator caught in a trap of his own making. Killing them would be an ending. But letting them live with their ruin, with the knowledge that she had been the one to break them? That was a victory. She gave Daniel a single, almost imperceptible nod. Then she turned her gaze back to the two broken men. Go, she said. The word was quiet, but it carried the force of a final judgment. For a moment, they just stared, unable to process their reprieve. Then, scrambling like rats from a sinking ship, they turned and practically ran for their cars. Engines roared to life, and headlights cut through the fog as they sped away, their pathetic, broken alliance dissolving into the night. The Vista Point fell silent again. The stage was empty. It was just her and Daniel, standing together in the swirling mist, the ghost of the Golden Gate Bridge somewhere in the darkness beyond. Two kings had come to claim a pawn. They were leaving with nothing, defeated by the Queen. The silence in the SUV on the way back to the safe house was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't the tense, assessing silence of their first ride together, nor the humming, strategic silence of their war planning. This was the vast, echoing silence that comes after a storm has passed, leaving the entire world clean and irrevocably changed. Beatrice stared out at the foggy streets, but she wasn't seeing them. She was seeing Daniel's face in the glare of the headlights, his eyes fixed only on her, his entire war effort held in suspension for a single word from her lips. The choice is yours. He had given her back her life, not by saving it, but by letting her be the one to decide its fate. When they walked back into the house, the air was still. The study, which had been a chaotic whirlwind of notes, maps, and strategies, now just looked like a room. The papers taped to the glass walls were artifacts from a battle that was already over. The war was won. The threat from her father was a ghost, his power broken. Thorn was a wounded animal, exposed and disgraced. Daniel walked to the mahogany desk and opened a drawer. He pulled out a slim leather portfolio. He didn't look at her, his movements were precise and detached, as if he were closing out a business account. It's over, he said, his voice flat, neutral. He placed the portfolio on the desk and opened it. Inside was a passport with a photo of her she didn't recognize and a name she had never heard. Beside it was a plane ticket, first class, one way to Rome, and a credit card with no name on it. You're free, Beatrice. Truly free. This passport is clean. The card is linked to an account with enough money to start a new life anywhere you want. No one will ever find you. He finally looked up at her, and his eyes were guarded, his face an unreadable mask. He was expecting her to take it. This was the deal, the price for her help. This was the freedom he had promised her. It was everything she had dreamed of that day she'd run from the hotel, a blank page in a world far away from mafias and manipulative fathers. She walked slowly toward the desk, her gaze falling on the ticket. Rome. A new name. A new life. The ultimate escape. She could walk out of this house and never look back. She could leave the shadows and the danger behind forever. But as she looked at the ticket, she didn't feel a thrill of relief. She felt a hollow ache. Running was what the old Beatrice would have done. The girl who felt like a pawn. But she wasn't a pawn anymore. Freedom wasn't a plane ticket. Freedom was standing on that cliffside, holding the lives of two powerful men in her hand, and making her own choice. Freedom was the man standing in front of her, who had been willing to lose everything to honor that choice. She looked up from the ticket and met his gaze. His stormy eyes were filled with a quiet resignation. He was letting her go. No, she said, her voice soft but sure. Daniel's composure cracked. A flicker of surprise, of confusion, crossed his face. No, I'm not leaving, she said, pushing the portfolio gently back toward him. I've spent my entire life running from cages. I'm done running. He stared at her, the silence stretching between them, thick with unspoken questions. Beatrice, he started, his voice rough. This world, it's not for you. You saw what it is. It's dangerous. It's ugly. I'm not afraid of the dark, she said, and she realized it was the truest thing she had ever said. She took a step closer to him, closing the space he had so carefully put between them. The freedom you promised me isn't in Rome. It's right here. It's the choice to stay. His eyes searched her face, looking for any hint of doubt, of obligation. He found none. "I'm not staying to be your guest," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "And I'm not staying to be a woman you have to protect." She held his intense gaze, laying down her final, most important term. "I'm staying to be your partner. Your equal. Or not at all." There it was. Her choice. Not to run, not to hide, but to claim her place beside the one person who had ever seen her as a queen. A slow, profound change came over Daniel's face. The guarded mask dissolved, replaced by a look of raw, unguarded emotion that made her heart stop. He didn't smile, not exactly. It was something deeper, a quiet, soul-shaking recognition. He had offered her an escape, and she had chosen him instead. He reached out, not to touch her, but to slide the leather portfolio off the desk, closing it with a quiet, final click. The unwritten future was no longer a plane ticket to a foreign land. It was here, in this room, in the space between two people who had found each other in the storm. 6 months later, the light was different. It wasn't the weak, gray light filtered through the fog of the safe house, nor the artificial, oppressive light of the hotel suite. Here, in the downtown office of the San Francisco Ledger, the late afternoon sun streamed through clean, wide windows, casting a warm, golden glow across Beatrice's desk. Her desk. In her office. The publication was new, an online-only investigative journal she had built from the ground up. It was hers. Her eyes were fixed on the screen, not on the complex web of a criminal empire, but on the crisp, clean layout of her latest article. It was a sprawling exposé on political corruption tied to city construction contracts, the very story her father had forced her to bury years ago. But what made her heart swell wasn't just the story itself. It was the 2 words printed in a small, bold font right below the headline. By Beatrice Hayes. Her name. Her real name, out in the open for the entire world to see. It was more than a byline, it was a declaration. A reclamation. The office door clicked open softly, pulling her from her thoughts. She didn't have to look up. She knew the sound of his footsteps on the hardwood floor, the way the air in the room subtly shifted with his presence. Daniel Irving walked in, looking completely out of place, and yet perfectly at home. He wasn't wearing one of his perfectly tailored suits. He was in dark jeans and a simple gray Henley that made him look less like a Mafia boss and more like the man who lived in her apartment. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee from the little shop downstairs. He placed one on the corner of her desk, his movements quiet and familiar. "Look serious," he said, his voice a low, easy rumble. Beatrice leaned back in her chair, a real, tired smile touching her lips. "It is. We just published. Councilman Miller is not going to be happy in the morning." Daniel took a sip of his coffee, his eyes scanning the headline on her screen. A flicker of something, pride maybe, passed through his gaze. "I heard Miller might be calling some friends at the district attorney's office to complain about your reporting methods." He paused, his expression casual. "I made a call of my own. Smooth things over. He'll be too busy with his own problems to worry about yours now." Beatrice felt a familiar warmth spread through her chest. This was their new normal. His protection was no longer a cage or a shield she had to stand behind. It was a silent, invisible force that moved ahead of her, quietly clearing the obstacles from her path so she could walk it herself. He didn't fight her battles for her. He just made sure the fight was fair. She stood up and walked to the large window that overlooked the sprawling city. The sun was setting, painting the sky in strokes of orange and purple. The lights of the city were beginning to flicker on, a constellation of a million different lives. Daniel came to stand beside her, their shoulders almost touching, a comfortable silence settling between them. He was still a man of shadows, a king in a world she would never truly understand. And she was a woman who lived in the light of provable facts and public truth. Somehow, they had found a way to stand on the line between those 2 worlds together. In the distance, the Golden Gate Bridge stood against the darkening sky. Its iconic red towers were sharp and clear, every cable and line defined. The fog was gone. The bridge wasn't a ghostly path into nothingness anymore. It was a promise, solid and strong, connecting one side to the other. Just like them. If you enjoyed the video, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel to keep up with our content.